Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review of Acquisition, which is episode 19 of season 1 of Star Trek Enterprise. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek as determined by my user polls. The episode to win my latest user poll, because my users hate me apparently, I'm just kidding, is the first season Enterprise episode Acquisition. So Acquisition is the episode in which Tucker returns from an away mission from being in a decon chamber to find the crew is completely knocked out and the ship is taken over by aliens who are trying to steal all their valuables. Now we, the audience, knows that these aliens are the Ferengi, and they act like Ferengi, and they quote rules of acquisition and all this such other bullshit, and they wake up Archer to try to get him to reveal where the location of the vault is, and then Trip also wakes up T'Pol. And then the three of them try to fool the Ferengi and trick them in hilarious ways, so hilarity ensues. And eventually they're able to trick the Ferengi because they're stupid, and they, phaser them, and they force the Ferengi to, carry all the heavy shit they stole back to the ship, and then they let them go. So I want to start by reading a quote from Brennan Braga, who is credited along with Rick Berman with the story by credit. And the quote is, "There's no excuse for the Ferengi. No excuse. That was an act of desperation. I hated it." Now, since we know that was Brennan Braga's reaction to this episode, and he doesn't think very kindly of it, who then can we say is responsible for this episode? Rick Berman, if you don't get what I'm getting at. And yeah. As I said, I was just talking about in Voyager, especially this case with Enterprise. He has a lot of story by credits. Funny thing, in the first 2 seasons of Enterprise, what a coincidence, this just happened to be terrible seasons, and happens to be Rick Berman was more in control of the creative side of things. What a wild coincidence. Anyway, so my problem with this episode does have less to do with the fact that this is a continuity error by including the Ferengi. Now, it is definitely a continuity error by including the Ferengi. Yes, it does bother me, but it's like the least of this episode's offenses, if I'm being honest. Because, they're not supposed to encounter the Ferengi until the 24th century, so doing it like 2 centuries in advance, and yet, they make a careful note to not name the Ferengi. They never mention the name of the Ferengi in these episodes, and so they can be like, oh, that's why they say they never met the Ferengi before, because they didn't know these aliens were the Ferengi. Well, Starfleet computers should be smart enough to match by the time they do meet the Ferengi, to be like, oh, here, by the way, a Starfleet ship encountered them all the way back in the 22nd century. But regardless of that, why would they never meet the Ferengi if they're that close? Because, so let me explain if you don't get it. It's a pretty simple concept. During the Enterprise era, the Enterprise NX-01 is traveling out from Earth and exploring space. So the area they're exploring, let's say that this microphone is Earth. So the area they're exploring is like this. But by the time we get to TOS era, they would have reached out more and more and kept exploring. So the area would have been more like this. And then by the time we get to the TNG area, the area would have been beyond the screen, like that. So if we encountered the Ferengi in this area, why the fuck isn't that we don't encounter them for real until this area. How the fuck did they get from all the way out there to here? And that would include, like, so there was a novel, apparently, I didn't read this, I was just reading about it on Memory Alpha, that tried to answer this and say that the Suliban, that the mystery man who controlled the Suliban ordered that they sabotage the Ferengi economy, and so they had economic crisis for for a century. So they stopped their interstellar travel for a century, and then they resumed it later, and that's why they never encountered them during that time. It's good as an excuse as any, but it's definitely just that, a bullshit excuse. But as I say, that's an issue, and I'm not saying it's not an issue, but it's not the biggest issue. It's not even one of the bigger issues for me. The bigger issue, the biggest issue for me, is why the fuck are you gonna do the Ferengi on the Enterprise? Forgetting about continuity, this is supposed to be a new show, you're supposed to take it in a new direction, and of all the legacy aliens that you could include, they do the Borg in season 2, to be fair, and the Klingons and Vulcans are well-known quantities, so that's fine. But out of all the other aliens, the Tholians, they do the Tholians in season 2 as well, to be fair, but only briefly. All these other aliens, Cardassians, whatever, you decide on the goddamn Ferengi. It's less of a continuity or canon thing and more of a creative deficit. The Ferengi are just not, they're not funny. They're mainly done as a comedic species. And it's not funny. And they're just devoid of creativity. Now, I'm a huge fan of Quark on Deep Space Nine. I think Quark's a great character. I think there are a lot of great Quark episodes. I think there are a lot of funny moments with Quark, particularly when you get him coupled with Odo. But, that's a credit to Armin Shimmerman, who's played him very well, and a credit to the writers. And the writers also wrote Rom and Nog fairly well at times, particularly Nog. Rom could be really funny. Later seasons, not the earlier seasons. But they're kind of the exception to the rule when it comes to the Ferengi, in my humble opinion, because they're, particularly Quark, is played as more of a sort of clever, complex character. He has a lot of ins and outs. He likes to stick close to the Ferengi dogma, but really in his heart he's really a nice guy, and he kind of skirts the rules, and he has these interpersonal relationship with the crew, and even though you never know what side he's on, he always in the end does the right thing and helps out the crew and stuff like that. And he's a complex character, and that's what makes him so interesting and great. Putting Rom and Nog aside, because they're sort of mixed bags, mostly good characters, but putting them aside, the rest of the Ferengi are two-dimensional, flat, goofy, dumb, where they only have one character trait, and that's they're greedy. And all about, ooh, look at how greedy I am, I'm so greedy. Particularly Grand Nagus is like that. I guess Quark's mother's not so much that way, kind of more she also has the character trait of being highly annoying, although she does want women's rights, so that's a positive thing about her, but still, yes, but the majority of the Ferengi is Brunt, for example, is just, he's a one-note character. The Nagus is a one-note character, and especially all the other generic Ferengi that they show, they're all one-note. Oh, look at how greedy they are! Oh, look, they're greedy! Isn't that funny? They're greedy. And that's just not interesting. And the humor that they try to use it for is just not that funny, because it's repeating the same joke over and over again. I talked about this in my review for the Nagus. And this is the same thing for the episode Inside Man in Voyager, where they had the Ferengi in that episode, and they were still like, yeah, they were one beat, one note, same joke, just flat, boring, uninteresting characters who were like very one-dimensional. Now, I will say, getting into modern Trek, that Lower Decks had a couple of good Ferengi episodes, like the one with their Rom appears in was actually, they did a good job of portraying the Ferengi as a lot more complex. They had different characteristics, and that's one of the things I liked about that episode. But the Berman era, the real Berman era, which was from Voyager season 5 to Enterprise season 3, or halfway through season 3, that's what I call the real Berman era. That's when Rick Berman had his fucking pulls and everything, because it's after Michael Piller and Jerry Taylor and Ira Stephen Bear were involved. So he was like, well, part of it was while Ira Stephen Bear was still doing DS9, but Rick Berman didn't give a fuck about DS9 and let Ira Stephen Bear do what he wanted. Rick Berman had his dirty little paws in the last couple seasons of Voyager, and definitely Enterprise, which is why the first 2 seasons suck. But anyway, during the real Berman era, the Ferengi sucked. They were just like one note, plain, boring characters. And not funny. And they're supposed to be comedic, and they're not funny. And so my problem with this episode is, out of all the species you can choose from, why the fuck would you choose these one-note, flat, uninteresting, non-funny, oh, look at how goofy it was. Now, this episode in particular, I mean, a lot of people try to make excuses for this episode and be like, oh, no, it had good actors like Ethan Phillips and Jeffrey Combs and Clint Howard playing Ferengi. Isn't that funny? But the thing is, it doesn't matter how good the actor is. If the characters aren't written well and they're flat and two-dimensional, then you can have good actors all you want. They're still going to suck. It's still not going to be good. And that's the same thing with Brunt. Like, Brunt was played by Jeffrey Combs, and that character always sucked. And was always uninteresting and always one beat. And I never gave a shit about that character. Except for the episode Magnificent Ferengi. That's a good episode. But that's the one exception. So I don't care how good the actors are. The characters are one beat. And the main plot is Enterprise. The episode begins with the Enterprise crew all knocked out except for Trip. Now here's the thing. That's an interesting concept, and I can see they doing a good episode. The general you, not you in particular, but I can see like someone, the creators doing a good episode with Trip wakes up in the decon changer and the crew's all knocked out and there's aliens taking over the ship. If those aliens weren't Ferengi, and if they didn't try to make it a goofy, silly, let's trick them into getting what they want, if they made it more like a Die Hard situation, like kind of Starship Mine for Enterprise, and had Trip had to run around like Bruce Willis and trying to outdo the terrorists or whatever, then I could see that being good. But this bullshit, where they're like, let's trick them let's play tricks on them and play on how stupid they are, reminds me a lot of Rascals. Now, granted, not nearly as bad as Rascals, because in terms of the Ferengi taking over the ship, it's a bit more believable here. Than a couple of old Klingon ships, and the Ferengi somehow just easily overpower the Enterprise D. Don't get me started. Please don't get me started on that bullshit. And the reason why they did that was the same reason as this episode, is so they could have the goofy Ferengi and people outsmart them and get their ship back. At least this time it's not children, though. But God, don't get me started on that episode. But so at least there's that. Like, it does make a bit more sense, because what happens here you have to, if you blink or not blink, but since it's audio, but if you like step out the room for 2 seconds, you'll miss it. Like, it's just mentioned very quickly in a line of dialogue. But apparently Trip went to this moon to investigate something. He found this weird artifact and brought it back to the ship, but apparently the artifact was a Trojan horse situation, and the Ferengi implanted it there to sort of trap them, and once it was on the ship, it released this gas that knocked them all out, and they should be knocked out for hours. But since Trip was in the decon chamber, he was like, it wasn't affected by it. So, okay, that I can buy more than fucking Klingon bird of old used Klingon bird of prey is easily overpowering the Enterprise D. To be fair, I can buy that more, but it still seems a bit off, too easy, like too simple. As I said, like, I might think this is an interesting concept, like if they did something interesting with it. I'm probably holding more against it because they did it so have these goofy one-note Ferengis, and they make all the same Ferengi jokes about, oh, they're greedy, and ooh, look at how greedy they are, and they're arguing amongst themselves, and they're so disorganized because they're so greedy. Ooh, that's such a trope. That's such a cartoon trope. And so this episode uses one of my most hated tropes. Like, my least favorite, I was going to say, but most hated, like, the trope that I absolutely despise with all my being every time I see it. And that's the trope of our heroes getting captured, and so they try to outwit their captors by appealing to a henchman who's underappreciated and treated like shit by the main, bad guys. And so they try to appeal to his ego and be like, oh, you're actually better, and oh, I, trust you, and oh, yours should be better than them. And so it gets the henchman to turn on his main guys. I fucking hate that trope. That is such a dumb trope. It drives me off the fucking walls every time I see that. Like, the Voyager episode Renaissance Man did that, and like Strange New Worlds had an episode in season 1 with the pirates or whatever that did that. I despise this trope with all my being. Like, I can't stand it, and it is at its worst here by playing. Again, it doesn't matter how great the actor is. You have Jeffrey Combs, a great actor, but the fact that they're playing this Ferengi is such an idiot. And that Archer is so easily able to outwit him. It's not funny. It's not funny. It's just, it drives me, it makes my blood boil. I fucking hate it. And, something else I noticed when watching this episode is, because, I'm watching this out of order. I've been watching Deep Space Nine Next Generation, so to go from that, well, I did watch an episode of Voyager before this, but still, to go from that to this, something that really stood out to me is that Scott Bakula is not a good actor in this episode. And to be fair to Mr. Bakula, he can be a good actor at times, but he even said himself that he felt like he kind of phoned it in a lot of times on Enterprise and really regretted that and felt like he let the rest of his cast members down by not putting in more effort, and I can see that. Like, to be fair, there's some episodes in season 3 and 4 where he really does a good job. Like, I just watched the episode Damage, and he's fucking phenomenal in that episode. But here, it's terrible. He's terrible. He just comes off as flat, one-dimensional, just simple. And kind of goofy a bit, and not goofy in the, like Ferengis are stupid goofy way, but goofy in like your dad trying to tell jokes kind of way, like, and not good jokes. I don't know. He just comes off as, not very good at all. And yeah, so the humor in this episode's just not funny. It's just flat out. It's just I don't find it the least bit funny, and of course to have to perv on to Paul, like it's Rick. This is the Rick Berman era. Really, it's like all the characters have to perv on to Paul every chance they get, and Jeffrey Combs' character is obsessed with her and like, oh, do you know Umox? I remember they showed that in the commercial. They're like, next week the big enemy, blah blah blah, is coming, and they cut to him going, do you know Umox? And they're like, oh, get a hit of Ferengi. Somebody shoot me. Fuck it. Hate the Ferengi. God damn it. Anyway, and the whole thing with, like, another thing they showed in the commercial that's just so fucking stupid is when the Ferengis are trying to talk to Porthos and be like, do you understand what I'm saying? Oh, they're talking to a dog. But you know what this had me thinking? They have a universal translator. They can speak to aliens that they never met before. Seems like it should work on animals too. Now, granted, animals don't necessarily have language per se, but it should be able to interpret. Like, they definitely have specific meaning. Particularly, the pets that are around human beings, for example, like cats, for example, they don't meow with other cats. They only meow with humans, and they do it for specific reasons, usually to get food, but sometimes it's for other things. And like like the dog my parents have, like she'll bark for specific reasons, like to go outside or to have food. So you could, if they had a universal translator, it should be able to translate it would be like very simple things like food, feed me, or outside, or something like that. It wouldn't be like a complex language you could have a conversation with. But they still should be able to translate what the pets are trying to communicate. And I think that should hold for all animals, especially you get the more complex animals like chimpanzees or dolphins. It's like the thing in Lower Decks, they have the cetacean ops or whatever, although that's like, was supposed to be something that was mentioned in the Next Generation but never shown, but whatever. But I believe in those cases they have the dolphins or the whales. I think they're whales, actually. Sorry, I'm going to be offensive to the whales, but they have them go and they have subtitles. But if you have a universal translator, they should be speaking English, actually. Because of the universal translator. But anyway, this is all a bit of an aside anyway. It's obviously they've just put that in to be like, oh, isn't it funny? The Ferengi are trying to talk to a dog. No! To answer your question, it is not funny. Not in the slightest bit. And then you got stuff like Trip and Archer putting on an act and being like, oh, show them the vault. Like, if you show them to the vault, I'm gonna blah blah. I'm gonna take you this way. And it's like, and oh yeah, you can let them take your wife, Hoshi. I'll give you 15 bars and whatever. And they're attacking each other and like, oh yeah. It's not funny. Not the least bit funny. Oh, look, the Ferengi are stupid, and they're putting on a goofy act to trick them. Like, that's the whole episode. That's not just that one gag. Like, the entire episode, all of Archer's interaction with Jeffrey Combs, who's like trying to manipulate him. Oh, look at how dumb he is. And then all the other interactions with the other Ferengi. Oh, they're trying to pit them against each other because they're so stupid. And Trip goes off and says, I'm going to take you to the vault, and just spins them around the bottom of the ship until they're ready to take them out because they're stupid. And that's the fucking episode. And oh yes, the trope about Jeffrey Combs' character being like, oh, and Archer manipulating him to like be more respected and whatever, and bullshit. Yeah, I don't have anything more to say about this episode. It's just I'll tell you what, though, like, I will say the first, like, 15, 20 minutes was just flat out boring. It wasn't even annoying. It was just flat out boring. Like, Enterprise Season 1 just cannot help being boring. Like, even when they have something overly goofy and stupid like this episode. And it was just like the Ferengi going around talking in their own language. And so, I don't understand, what's the point of that? Like, is it supposed to be like sight humor? Because you can't understand a fucking word they're saying to each other. So I was just bored. I was like, this is so goddamn boring. Like, the whole crew's unconscious. Trip's running around in his underwear because, Rick Berman's perviness is not exclusive to women. and I was just, it was just so boring. It was just so goddamn boring. Anyway, I'm done. I'm done with this goddamn episode. Well, okay, one last thing I'll say about the Ferengi speaking in different language, or their own language. This is the only time we hear the Ferengi language, or the second time I should say, since Little Green Men. I didn't look this up, but I'm pretty sure they were just, they didn't actually create a language. Like, sometimes they do with, like, Klingon and stuff. But I'm pretty sure they just did, like, gibberish, but I think they just made the gibberish sound similar to the gibberish that we heard in Little Green Men. That's because it did sound a bit similar. So I think they're like, I think they did actually go and listen to that and be like, let's make, language sound like that. But I'm pretty sure it's gibberish. But yeah, that was so goddamn boring. So boring. I don't even know what the point of any of this is. Anyway, as much as I'm not happy with the viewers for choosing this as the poll, because it means I'm going to have to watch it again when I get to Enterprise. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Obama. But anyway, even so, I still would very much like to thank all of my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. I do appreciate it a lot. It helps me continue with the channel. Helps me grow as a person. Okay, maybe I'm exaggerating. But no, still really appreciate all the help I get. And so I'd like to give a big special thanks to Jordan Johnson, Brandon Neil Howes, and Antarius. Thank you all so very, very much for your strong support. And then I'd also like to give a shout out to Tyler Cease, Benjamin Mead, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Mighty Jester, Joel Valls, Alessandro Miglasiro, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very much for your support. So, let's see. I believe we do have some patron comments on this episode. First comment is from none other than Kyrie091, who says, "Acquisition? More like, it's shit, son." Kind of like that one too, actually. That's a pretty good one. These fan service episodes of Enterprise always bring me down. I don't know why. When DS9 does a fan service episode, we love it. When Voyager has lots of references to TNG, we're like, woo, yeah. And Lower Decks is basically 5 seasons of fan service episodes with many gags that will only be caught by total Trek nerds. But for some reason, when Enterprise does it, they always suck. Enterprise's best episode are when they're quit trying to say, "Hey, TNG fans, remember the Ferengi and the Borg?" and just tell their own stories. Like that one where Hoshi is stuck in a haunted house and has to write a story or something. Or that one where Archer said ass. Or that time when Dr. Phlox smiled. So the episode that Archer said ass and the time Phlox smiled, those are both the same episode. That's the pilot episode, Broken Bow. Although I think Archer might have said ass other times. And of course Phlox smiles other times as well. But you're talking about like the weird digitally enhanced smile. I think the only time they did that was the pilot episode. I think. We'll take a look out for that when I'm actually covering it. But no, I actually disagree about Enterprise doing fan service always sucks because in the Mirror Darkly parts 1 and 2 was complete and utter, like the whole thing was fan service. Like that's the biggest fan service episode of Legacy Trek, and it was great. It was the best episode. In fact, it was the only good episode of the show. You know why? Because it's the only episode that didn't have that goddamn theme song. Now, it's not. I don't really think it's the best episode of the show, but so happy they didn't have the theme song. But no, it's still a good episode. And it was complete fan service. And the Borg one, you mentioned the Borg Enterprise episode is actually pretty good. It's way better than all the bullshit they did in the later seasons of Voyager. I'll tell you that much for damn sure. Anyway, I mean, season 4 and then first half of season 5 had some good Borg episodes. And then Survival Instinct in season 6 was good. And the one with the kids was fine or whatever. But whenever they had the Borg Queen, it was like, no. But anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, "This is the worst Ferengi episode in the franchise. I even hate most of the ones on TNG. I only like the Ferengi episodes on Deep Space Nine, except the one we don't talk about. Maybe when you reviewed it? So my rating is 2. Maybe I gave it a 2 because the guest stars out of 10. I wonder how the crew never told anyone about the Ferengi or the Borg. Maybe T'Pol erased the entry from the ship logs and gave everybody a mind meld." Well, see, the Ferengi, they never said the name Ferengi, so yeah, that's still dumb. And the Borg, they're like, oh, maybe they actually never said the term the Borg either. If you watch that episode, you notice they never say we are the Borg. They never used the word Borg. So again, they claim ignorance, and they're like, oh no, so these species might come back. It's gonna mean they're gonna arrive sometime in the 24th century. That episode's good. Other than that, that's like the one sort of, that was one of the most goofy like call-outs that Star Trek has ever done. But anyway, next comment is from Antarius. He says, I only saw the first 10 or 15 episodes of season 1 of Enterprise when it first aired, but then quit watching the series and never returned. It certainly was meant to be funny that the Ferengi are stealing chairs, plates, cakes, but the long scenes of plundering Ferengi were just boring, and the rest of the episode was not much more interesting. Manipulating one of the Ferengi into turning against the leader was so cliche. I like Ethan Phillips as the captain, but besides that, there was nothing there that I haven't seen better. Other times, my rating is a 2 out of 10. 100%. There's nothing done in this episode that hasn't been done better elsewhere. And yeah, what is the deal with the Ferengi stealing chairs? I don't think I ever paid attention to that because it's so boring. But I noticed that this time I was like, why the fuck is he stealing it? He's like stealing the Helms chair, like Merryweather's chair, and it looked weird. It had like looked like a really like cheap piece of shit chair, and like, why is he stealing this cheap piece of shit chair? I guess it's supposed to be funny. I don't know what the fuck the writers of this episode were thinking. But anyway, next comment is from Ricky, who says, this episode is a piece of shit trash. I never liked the concept of Ferengis appearing in the show that takes place nearly 100 years before TOS and were considered a new discovery of a species in the beginning of TNG. This episode is aggravating to watch. I hate the dumb cliche where the heroes get the dumb henchmen to turn against the boss, and I hate the Ferengi's obsession with T'Pol. I mean, everything about this episode sucks. So my rating, of course, is a 1 out of 10. I love how you don't mince words, Ricky. This episode's a piece of shit trash. Totally true. Straight to the point. Love it. Anyway, next comment is from... who's it from? It's from Norman Buckwald. Sorry, I got distracted. Norman Buckwald, who says, Braga! Uh-oh, ratings do not appear to be doing that well for Enterprise. How can we get some of the fans back? Maybe do an entire 5-minute intro credit to Faith of the Heart? Berman. No, that's not it. Though I think the theme song could have more bounce. Hey, I got it. Let's bring back the popular aliens from the next generation. It's bad enough we threw in some Andorians and our ratings didn't go up gangbusters. They're too TOS. How about the Romulans? Actually, hold on. Let me start this again. I want to do it more in the tune of the pitch meeting. I can see this being in pitch meetings. Ratings don't appear to be doing that well for Enterprise. How can we get the ratings back? Maybe do an entire 5-minute intro of Faith in the Heart? No, that's not it. Though I think the theme song could have more bounce to it. Hey, I got it. Let's bring back some popular aliens from the Next Generation era. It's bad enough we threw in some Andorians and our rating didn't go up gangbusters. They're too TOS. How about the Romulans? Braga. No, it can't be the Romulans. Remember, none have ever seen a Romulan until the key original series episode. Berman. Well, we can have it that they never ask or record that species. Let's do that. Braga. No, the Romulans are arrogant enough. They'd pronounce themselves. Plus, they look like the Paul and the Vulcans. Wouldn't that puzzle, Archer? Anyway, I'd like to throw in some comedy. And no, Rick, please do not suggest the Packlids. Berman. Comedy, you say? Why not the Ferengi? No one ever asks them who they are, and we can even throw in a reference from the earlier episodes so the audience is on to them. Braga. Hell yeah! No, sorry, it's hey yeah. So, hey yeah! Ferengi are such a crowd pleaser. Berman. And we can get Jeffrey Combs to play one, and Ethan Phillips has been wanting to know a couple times, has been wanting to know if he could play some type of role on Enterprise, and he did play for Ferengi a couple times. Braga. Well, if we do, we must throw in Ron Howard's brother. He's been asking me about having another role after his bit on DS9. Berman. Okay, done and done. However, we must have Trip in that blue underwear. They'll put the rest to sleep. Braga. As long as they ogle after T'Pol in some way. Berman. Well, they'll be selling her into sex slavery, of course. Braga. Of course. Berman. Why, the script writes itself. One Ferengi. Sorry, that's it. One Ferengi whip out of 10. Yeah, they showed the whip that hadn't been seen since Last Outpost because it's a stupid idea. But they did a callback to that, and oh, look, the Ferengi whip. Yeah, I don't know. I might have given more some of the dialogue differently if I would give it more of the make sure they oogle to Paul and well, yeah, you did have them both kind of be like selling the sex thing, so yeah. To be fair, I think Braga's a better writer than that. I think he was just too much of a pushover, and that Berman could just push him around. But yeah, he's not a good showrunner. But anyway, let's see. Next comment is from Medijester. He says, apologies to Mark for my voting for this one in the poll. I regret any distress revisiting this episode has caused. Any positives? I like Jeffrey Combs, Clint Howard, and Ethan Phillips. Just a shame they weren't given a better episode to work on. This episode, though, isn't funny, isn't interesting, and serves no real purpose. This was a time in season 1 where the few people I knew who watched the show had gotten bored and stopped watching. I kept going back. But by the time the show started to get really good in season 3, they didn't come back. Episodes like the season 1 and 2 in general, I blame for us not getting a season 5 of Enterprise. The damage was done early on. take this episode to the top of the Tower of Commerce on Ferenginar and throw it off. One slip of Latinum out of 10. So yeah, the frustrating thing for me is that at the time Season 1 and 2 of Enterprise, particularly Season 1, came out, I was still in love Star Trek, let's watch every single episode. I don't think I was taping it off. Well, I might have been taping it off the TV. I can't remember at this stage, the early 2000s. I don't know. Maybe? I don't ever remember having Enterprise tapes. I know that I taped, pretty sure I taped Voyager. I don't know. I can't remember. I remember I had this TV VCR combo. I was living in Oregon at the time. But anyway, so I was like, oh, watch it every week. Oh, and it sucked. And I was like, oh, and yet I was still punishing myself and watching it. And then when Season 3 came along, I was having a lot of sort of marriage issues and other emotional stuff going on. And that's when I moved to New Zealand. And then once I moved to New Zealand, it was in the middle of Season 3 airing. They weren't showing it over there, so I couldn't watch it, and I had to get my mom to tape it off the TV, and she missed tons of episodes. So I missed so much of Season 3 and watched it out of order. Yet that was the one season I would have loved to see, like, in order, every single episode. Yet Seasons 1 and 2, I was able to watch every single fucking episode. Every excruciating piece of shit episode. So frustrating it was that way. But, and Antares mentioned earlier about giving up after 15. Yeah, I don't blame people for giving up on Enterprise after Season 1. The only reason I didn't give up is I was too much of a Trekkie, and I was like, and I was just punishing a glutton for punishment. I just couldn't give up on a Star Trek show, no matter how bad it was. And, and as far as, like, yes, it never really recovered from the first two seasons. I will say the ratings of Season 3 and 4 did get better, but they still weren't, it didn't have the big following that other Star Trek shows because too many people, I mean, I think there was still a big, like, when Voyager finished, there was still a big fan base. There was still I remember delivering pizzas while Voyager series finale was airing, and everyone was having watch parties and shit. And so there was and I remember delivering pizzas for Enterprise too, and people were watching that and being like, "Oh my god, yeah, that's not very good." So it's like there was a huge like following for Star Trek, but it just dropped off in these terrible 2 seasons. And then when the show got better, it's just like it wasn't the same. They lost all that goodwill that they had. So yeah, I agree. Anyway, next comment is from Brandon Neil Howes, who says, my thoughts on Ferengi comedy are well known, but this kind of comedy is too broad for me. I watched and listened to a few podcasts, and with one exception, all of them found this episode hilarious. What the fuck is wrong with you people? And now I can't unsee the back of any Ferengi's head looking like my Earth's cheeks. Untranslated spoken Ferengi is nearly as boring as listening to Discovery Season 1 Klingonese. More boring, I would say. And T'Pol is more of a bitch than usual. This episode should never have been made, much less aired. 1 interrogated beagle out of 10. Yeah, who the hell was saying that this was a funny episode? Although I was watching one review that this is a funny episode, so, and it's a channel that I know you watch as well, so we're probably thinking of the same person, but there's more than one. There's more than one that actually thought this was funny. Again, I agree. I totally agree with your sentiments of what the fuck is wrong with you people. I don't know, sense of humor is subjective, I will say, but still, like, this is obviously sucks. But anyway, thank you, patrons, so much for your comments. So my rating for Acquisition out of 10 is a 1! You gotta say it like that. A 1! The worst, absolute worst Yeah, I call this one of the worst episodes of the entire show. I stand by this. There's nothing good about it. I don't care if it has good actors. It sucks. The characters are so flat, boring, two-dimensional, and it's goofy beyond belief. Scott Bakula gives a terrible performance. The first half is boring. They just use any excuse they can to perv on to Paul and have Trip run around in his underwear. And yeah, like there's nothing. There's nothing here. There's nothing good about this episode. Devoid of anything positive. So anyway, that is it for my review of Acquisition. So if you enjoyed this video and you want to support the channel, you could consider supporting me on Patreon. There's a link in the description below. In that same description, you will find a link over to Podbean, which has, and it could take you to any various other like places you find podcasts like Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, that sort of places. If you want to listen to all this stuff on in podcast form, well, not this video, but when I do my regular Star Trek episode reviews, yeah, you can listen to it in podcast form. If you so desire, you maybe even leave me a review, positive review, that sort of thing. Yeah, and other ways to support the channel, give me a like on this here, then there YouTube video, subscribe, all those sorts of things really help out the channel. Very much appreciated. Okay, so let's see what's coming up on said channel. So we're done with the polls. So Monday, I'll be doing my top 10 winners of my top 10 shows of the year. So every year I do a top 10 countdown, and so I've done it 10 years in a row now, so I'm taking each winner from those 10 years and making a top 10 out of those shows, so the winners. And then on Tuesday, I'll be doing a Patreon requested video ranking the Star Trek series finales. And then on Wednesday, I'll be over on Patreon doing a Patreon exclusive video for the Patreon supporters. Finally starting Season 3 of DS9, so getting back on track with The Search Revisited. And on Thursday, back on my main channel for a public video for House of Quark. And then on Saturday, continuing with the DS9 Season 3 train with a review of Equilibrium. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek Deep Space Nine and many other videos on Star Trek and other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.